The storm hit just as darkness swallowed the Colorado sky whole, and Deanna Graves knew with bone-deep certainty that if she didn't find shelter within the hour, she would die out here in the wilderness. She urged her exhausted horse forward through sheets of rain so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. Lightning cracked across the heavens, illuminating the landscape in stark white flashes. Her clothes clung to her skin, soaked through hours ago. Her teeth chattered so violently she'd bitten her tongue twice. The metallic taste of blood mixed with rainwater in her mouth. Diana had been running for 3 days straight. 3 days since she'd fled her uncle's house in Denver with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's silver locket tucked inside her bodice. 3 days since she discovered his plan to marry her off to a cattle baron twice her age, a man known for his cruelty to his previous 2 wives, both of whom had died under mysterious circumstances. She was 21 years old, and she refused to become the 3rd Mrs. Callahan. Another flash of lightning, and this time Deanna saw something that made her heart leap. A structure. Actual walls and a roof, barely visible through the curtain of rain but unmistakably there. She didn't know if it was a barn, a house, or an abandoned shack, and she didn't care. It was shelter. Deanna kicked her horse into a faster walk, the poor animal as exhausted as she was. As they drew closer, she could make out more details. It was a ranch, a proper one, with a main house, a barn, and what looked like a stable. Warm light glowed from the windows of the house, like a beacon calling her home. She slid from her horse's back in front of the main house, her legs nearly giving out when her feet hit the muddy ground. She had to grab the saddle to keep from falling. For a moment, she just stood there, trembling from cold and exhaustion, trying to gather enough strength to knock on the door. Before she could take a step toward the porch, the front door swung open. A man stood silhouetted against the warm interior light, tall and broad-shouldered. He held a rifle, but the moment his eyes landed on her, he lowered it immediately. "Jesus Christ," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. He set the rifle just inside the door and came down the porch steps without bothering to grab a coat, though the rain immediately began soaking his shirt. "Madam, are you hurt?" Deanna tried to answer, but her jaw was shaking too hard to form words. She just shook her head. "Can you walk?" he asked, already reaching for her. She nodded, but when she tried to take a step, her knees buckled. The man caught her before she hit the ground, one arm sliding behind her back, the other under her knees. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I've got you now. You're safe." Those words broke something in Deanna. After 3 days of terror and exhaustion, of constantly looking over her shoulder, of wondering if every stranger she passed would be the one to drag her back to Denver, someone had just told her she was safe. A sob tore from her throat. "Easy now," the man said, carrying her up the porch steps and through the front door. The warmth of the house hit her like a physical thing, and she shuddered violently. "Let's get you warm and dry first. Everything else can wait." He carried her through a simply furnished but clean front room and into what appeared to be a kitchen. He set her carefully in a chair near a massive iron stove that radiated blessed heat. "Stay right there," he said, then moved quickly around the kitchen. He grabbed blankets from somewhere, draped them around her shoulders, then put a kettle on the stove. He moved with efficient purpose, no wasted motion. Diana finally got a good look at him. He was probably in his mid-20s, with dark brown hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. His face was tanned from hours in the sun, with strong features and a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore simple clothes, Dark trousers, a shirt that had probably been white once but had faded to cream, suspenders hanging loose at his hips. "Your horse," Deanna managed to say through chattering teeth. "I left my horse." "I'll see to your horse in just a minute," he said, pouring hot water into a cup and adding tea leaves. "You're more important right now. Can you hold this?" Deanna took the cup, wrapping both hands around its warmth. The heat seeping into her palms felt like heaven. The man crouched in front of her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. Up close, she could see flecks of green in that whiskey gaze. "I'm Quinn Irwin. This is my ranch, the Four Corners, about 10 miles outside of Florissant, Colorado. You're safe here, I promise you that. Nobody's going to hurt you under my roof. Do you understand?" Deanna nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks to mix with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. "Good," Quinn said. He stood, went to a cabinet and pulled out a towel. "Now, I need to go take care of your horse and make sure the barn is secure for the night. While I'm gone, there's a bedroom through that door there." He pointed to a doorway off the kitchen. "It was my mother's room. You get out of those wet clothes, dry off, and wrap up in the blankets. There should be a nightgown in the bureau that will fit you. Can you manage that?" "Yes," Deanna whispered. "Thank you." Quinn grabbed a coat from a peg by the door and a hat, pulling them on. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't tasted my cooking." He flashed her a quick smile that transformed his serious face, then headed out into the storm. Diana sat there for a moment, sipping the hot tea and trying to process what had just happened. She'd expected to have to beg for shelter. She'd expected suspicion, maybe even hostility. Instead, this stranger had scooped her up without hesitation, and was now taking care of her horse while she sat warm in his kitchen. She forced herself to stand and made her way to the bedroom Quinn had indicated. It was small but tidy, with a simple bed covered in a quilt, a bureau, and a washstand. A mirror hung on one wall. Deanna caught a glimpse of herself and nearly gasped. She looked like something that had crawled out of the river, pale and bedraggled, her long dark hair plastered to her head and shoulders. She stripped off her wet clothes with trembling fingers, dried herself with the towel Quinn had given her, and found the promised nightgown in the bureau. It was soft flannel, warm and clean. She pulled it on, wrapped one of the blankets around herself like a shawl, and returned to the kitchen. The tea had helped. She could feel warmth starting to creep back into her bones. She sat back down near the stove and waited for Quinn to return. He came back about 15 minutes later, dripping wet himself now. "Your horse is in the barn, fed and watered and brushed down. Good animal. Been ridden hard, though." "I know," Deanna said softly. "I'm sorry, I didn't have a choice." Quinn hung up his wet coat and hat, then went to the stove and began pulling out food. "You don't need to explain anything to me tonight. Right now, you need food and rest. The rest can wait for morning." "Thank you," Deanna said again. "I don't have money to pay you for your trouble, but I can work. I'm strong and I can cook and clean and handle animals. I promise I'll earn my keep." Quinn turned from the stove to look at her, an odd expression on his face. "I'm not asking you to pay me for basic human decency. You needed help and I'm helping. That's all there is to it." He turned back to his cooking, and Deanna felt fresh tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had been simply kind to her, expecting nothing in return? Quinn set a plate in front of her. Bread, cheese, cold beef, and beans heated on the stove. Simple fare, but Deanna ate like she was starving, which she realized she nearly was. She couldn't remember her last real meal. "Slow down," Quinn said gently, sitting across from her with his own plate. "You'll make yourself sick." Deanna forced herself to eat more slowly. As the food filled her stomach and the warmth from the stove seeped deeper into her bones, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Quinn noticed. Of course he noticed. "You're dead on your feet," Go on to bed. We can talk in the morning. I don't want to take your mother's room, Deanna protested weakly. She died 2 years ago, Quinn said, his voice matter of fact but with an undercurrent of old grief. The room's empty. Might as well be used. Go on now. Sleep as long as you need. Deanna didn't have the strength to argue further. She made her way to the bedroom, crawled under the heavy quilt, and was asleep before she could think another thought. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The storm, the desperate ride, Quinn finding her and taking her in. Diana sat up and realized her clothes from last night were gone. In their place, laid neatly over the back of a chair, were clean clothes. A simple dress in dark blue calico, stockings, and undergarments. They looked like they'd fit her. She dressed quickly, ran her fingers through her hair in a futile attempt to tame it, and ventured out into the kitchen. Quinn stood at the stove, cooking. He'd changed into clean clothes himself, dark trousers and a blue shirt that made his eyes look more green than brown. His hair was damp, like he'd recently washed. He turned when he heard her. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Better," Deanna said, and it was true. The bone-deep exhaustion had faded to simple tiredness. "Thank you for the clothes. They were my mother's. I kept some of her things." Quinn turned back to the stove. "Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." Deanna sat watching him work. He moved with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown last night. Within minutes, he'd set plates of eggs, bacon, and fried potatoes on the table, along with fresh coffee. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Deanna was acutely aware that Quinn was giving her space, not pushing her to explain herself. But she owed him an explanation. He'd taken her in, given her shelter and food and clothes. The least she could do was tell him the truth. "My name is Deanna Graves," she said. "I'm from Denver. I'm running from my uncle. He wants to force me into a marriage I want no part of." Quinn set down his fork and gave her his full attention. His eyes were serious but not judgmental. "Is he likely to come looking for you here?" "I don't know," Deanna admitted. "I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't know myself. I just ran." "Tell me about this uncle of yours," Quinn said. So Deanna did. She told him how her parents had died in a cholera outbreak when she was 15, how she'd gone to live with her uncle Malcolm Graves, her father's brother. How at first, things had been tolerable. Malcolm had provided for her, given her a room in his Denver home, allowed her to help with the household. But as she'd grown older, she'd realized that Malcolm saw her as a burden, another mouth to feed. Then 3 weeks ago, Malcolm had announced that he'd arranged a marriage for her. The groom was to be Samuel Callahan, a wealthy cattle baron from Wyoming. Deanna had heard the stories about Callahan. His first wife had died falling down the stairs, allegedly. The second had succumbed to pneumonia after only 6 months of marriage. People whispered that Callahan had a terrible temper, that both women had borne suspicious bruises. Deanna had refused. Malcolm had been furious. He'd locked her in her room, telling her she would agree to the marriage or he'd throw her out with nothing. Deanna had climbed out the window that night and never looked back. When she finished her story, Quinn was quiet for a long moment. "You did the right thing," he finally said. "Running, I mean. A woman shouldn't be forced into marriage against her will, especially not to a man like that." "My uncle will say I'm ungrateful," Deanna said bitterly. "He'll say he gave me a home and I threw it in his face. Your uncle can say whatever he wants. He's wrong." Quinn's voice was firm. "You're a person, not property to be sold off to the highest bidder." Deanna felt something loosen in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear someone say that, to validate that she'd been right to run. "What will you do now?" Quinn asked. That was the question, wasn't it? Deanna had been so focused on escaping that she hadn't thought much beyond that. I need to find work, somewhere to stay. I can't impose on your hospitality forever. Quinn leaned back in his chair, studying her with those thoughtful, whiskey eyes. What if you didn't have to find somewhere else to stay? Diana's heart skipped. What do you mean? This ranch is a lot of work for one man, Quinn said slowly, as if working through his thoughts as he spoke. I manage because I've been doing it since I was a boy and because I don't have much of a life beyond work. But it would be easier with help. You said last night you could cook and clean and handle animals. Were you telling the truth? Yes, Deanna said. I grew up on a small farm before my parents died. I know how to work. Quinn nodded, seeming to come to some decision. Then stay. Work here. Help me run this place. I can't pay much in cash, but I can provide room and board and you'd be safe. Your uncle doesn't know me, doesn't know this ranch. He'd have no reason to look for you here. It was a generous offer, more generous than Deanna had any right to expect, but something in his phrasing made her hesitate. You said you can't pay much. Does that mean you're struggling? Quinn's mouth quirked up in what might have been a smile. I appreciate the direct question. No, I'm not struggling. The ranch does well enough. I have cattle, horses, some crops. I meant that I don't have a lot of spare cash lying around. Most of what I make goes back into the ranch. But you wouldn't want for anything. I'd make sure of that. Deanna looked around the kitchen, seeing it with new eyes. It was simple but well maintained. Everything was clean and in good repair. The stove was quality, the furniture sturdy. This wasn't the home of a man in poverty. This was the home of a man who worked hard and lived practically. Why are you offering this? Deanna asked. You don't know me. I know enough, Quinn said. I know you're brave enough to run from a bad situation. I know you're honest enough to offer to work for your keep, and I know you need help. He stood, collecting the breakfast plates. But the offer comes with one condition. Deanna tensed. Here it was, the catch she'd been waiting for. What condition? Quinn met her eyes. Honesty. If your uncle tracks you here, if there's trouble coming, I need you to tell me. I can handle trouble, but I need to see it coming. Can you promise me that? Relief made Deanna almost giddy. Yes, I promise. Then we have an agreement. Quinn held out his hand. Deanna shook it. His palm was calloused from hard work, his grip firm but careful. When their hands touched, Deanna felt a strange flutter in her stomach. She told herself it was just nerves, just relief at having found safety. It couldn't be anything else. Over the next few days, Deanna settled into life at the Four Corners Ranch. She discovered that Quinn was a man of few words but decisive action. He woke before dawn, worked until well after dark, and rarely complained about anything. He was also, despite his earlier self-deprecation, an excellent cook. Deanna threw herself into helping with the ranch work. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, not because it was especially dirty but because she needed to feel useful. She took over the cooking, discovering that Quinn had been living primarily on bacon, eggs, beans, and the occasional roast. She started baking bread, making stews, even attempting pies with preserved fruit she found in the cellar. Quinn seemed bemused by the changes but didn't complain. If anything, he seemed pleased. She also helped with the animals. Quinn had a small herd of cattle, about 30 head, and a dozen horses in various stages of training. He raised and trained horses to sell, he explained, and that was where most of his income came from. Cattle were steady money, but horses could bring in real profit if you were good at training them. Deanna had always loved horses. Her father had taught her to ride when she was barely big enough to sit in a saddle. She took to helping Quinn with the training naturally, and he seemed impressed with her skill. "You're good with them," he commented one afternoon as Deanna worked with a young bay mare in the corral. "Patient. That's the most important thing. My father taught me, Deanna said, running her hand along the mare's neck. He said you have to listen to what the horse is telling you, not just try to impose your will on them. Your father was a wise man, Quinn said. It was the most personal thing he'd said to her since that first morning. Quinn didn't talk much about himself, and Deanna hadn't pushed. She figured he'd open up when he was ready, if he was ready. She was keeping her own secrets, after all. She still hadn't told him everything about her past, about the real reason her uncle was so determined to marry her off. The truth was, Diana had inherited money from her mother. Not a fortune, but a tidy sum that her mother's family had left in trust for her. The trust would come under Diana's control when she turned 25 or when she married, whichever came first. If Deanna married, the money would legally become her husband's property. Malcolm knew about the trust. So did Samuel Callahan. Deanna suspected that was the real reason Callahan had agreed to the marriage. He didn't want her. He wanted her money. Deanna had fled without accessing any of the trust funds. She'd been afraid that trying to withdraw money would alert Malcolm to her plans. Now she was essentially penniless until she turned 25, which was still 4 years away. But she'd rather be poor and free than wealthy and trapped. As the days passed into weeks, Deanna found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. The constant tension she'd carried in Malcolm's house, always waiting for him to criticize or berate her, began to ease. Quinn never raised his voice. He never criticized her work. If something wasn't done to his liking, he simply showed her how he preferred it done and moved on. He was also unfailingly respectful. He never came into her room without knocking, never touched her without reason, never looked at her in a way that made her uncomfortable. After living in her uncle's house, where she'd always felt vaguely unsafe, this was a revelation. But respect wasn't the only thing Deanna felt from Quinn. There was something else, a tension that hummed between them when they were in close quarters. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, an unreadable expression in those whiskey eyes. And she found herself watching him in return, noticing the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the competent grace with which he handled the horses. Diana tried to ignore these feelings. She was in his debt. He'd given her shelter and safety when she'd needed it most. The last thing she should be doing was developing romantic feelings for him. But the heart, she was discovering, didn't much care about should or shouldn't. One evening, about 3 weeks after Diana's arrival, a storm rolled in. Not as severe as the one that had driven her to Quinn's door, but enough to keep them both inside after supper. They sat in the front room, Diana mending one of Quinn's shirts and Quinn oiling a saddle, when he finally asked the question she'd been expecting. "Tell me more about your parents," he said. "What were they like?" Diana set down her mending. "They were happy," she said, smiling at the memory. "That's what I remember most. They were always laughing together, always finding excuses to touch each other. My father would come in from the fields and swing my mother around the kitchen, and she'd scold him for tracking in dirt, but she'd be smiling the whole time." "Sounds nice," Quinn said, his voice wistful. "What about your parents?" Deanna asked. "You said your mother died 2 years ago." "What about your father?" Quinn's jaw tightened slightly. "He died when I was 19, thrown from a horse, broke his neck, died instantly." "I'm sorry," Deanna said softly. "It was a long time ago," Quinn said, though his voice suggested it still hurt. "My mother never really recovered from it. She kept the ranch going because she knew my father would have wanted that, but her heart wasn't in it anymore. When she died, it was almost a relief. I knew she was with him again." "That's a beautiful way to think about it," Deanna said. Quinn looked up from the saddle, his eyes meeting hers. "I used to think it was sad, how much my mother loved my father, how his death nearly destroyed her. But now I wonder if maybe that's what real love is, something so deep that losing it carves a hole in you. But would you want that? Deanna asked. To love someone so much that losing them would break you. I think, Quinn said slowly, that love like that isn't something you choose. It chooses you. And when it does, you either accept it or spend your whole life running from the possibility of it. Something in his words, or maybe in the way he looked at her as he said them, made Deanna's breath catch. The air in the room suddenly felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. Quinn seemed to realize it too. He cleared his throat and turned back to the saddle. Anyway, that's just my philosophy. I'm sure others see it differently. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. Deanna could feel it, a new awareness, a possibility that hadn't quite existed before. The next morning, Deanna woke to find Quinn already gone, which was unusual. Normally, he waited to have breakfast with her before heading out for the day's work. She found a note on the kitchen table in his angular handwriting. Gone to Florissant for supplies. Back by evening. Quinn. Deanna spent the day doing chores around the ranch, but her mind kept drifting back to their conversation from the night before. What had Quinn meant by all that talk about love? Was he speaking generally, or was he trying to tell her something? She was being foolish, she told herself. Quinn was a kind man who'd offered her shelter. Just because he wasn't cruel didn't mean he harbored romantic feelings for her. She was reading too much into simple kindness because she wasn't used to it. But then she remembered the way he sometimes looked at her. The careful distance he always maintained, as if he didn't trust himself to get too close. The way his voice softened when he spoke to her. Diana was still turning these thoughts over in her mind when Quinn returned in the late afternoon. He rode up to the house leading a pack horse laden with supplies, but there was tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there that morning. "Is everything all right?" Deanna asked, coming out to help him unload. Quinn dismounted, his jaw tight. There were men in town asking questions. Strangers. They were asking if anyone had seen a young woman, dark-haired, traveling alone. They said they were looking for a missing niece. Diana's blood ran cold. "My uncle." "That would be my guess," Quinn said. He began unloading supplies with swift efficiency. "I don't think they connected you to me. I'm not exactly a regular in town, and I didn't give them any reason to be interested. But they're looking, Deanna. And Florissant isn't that big. If they're determined, they'll eventually work their way out to all the nearby ranches." Fear clawed at Diana's throat. "I should leave. I shouldn't have stayed this long. I've put you in danger." "You're not going anywhere," Quinn said firmly. He stopped unloading and turned to face her fully. "You're safe here, and I meant that, but we need to think strategically." "What do you mean?" Quinn ran a hand through his hair. A gesture Deanna had learned meant he was working through a problem. "If they come here looking, what will they find? A rancher living alone who recently hired on some help. They'll ask questions, and if you're here, they'll recognize you." "So I do need to leave," Deanna said, trying to keep the despair out of her voice. "No," Quinn said. "I have a different idea." He took a deep breath, and Deanna saw something that looked like nerves flicker across his face. Quinn, who faced down half-wild horses and never showed fear, was nervous. "What idea?" Deanna asked. Quinn met her eyes. "Marry me." Deanna stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What, marry me?" Quinn repeated. "If those men come here and find Mrs. Irwin instead of Deanna Graves, a single woman traveling alone, they won't have any reason to think you're the person they're looking for. You'd be protected by marriage by my name." Diana's mind reeled. "That's insane. We barely know each other." "I know enough," Quinn said. "I know you're brave and honest and hardworking. I know you're kind to the animals and that you make the best biscuits I've ever tasted. I know that every morning when I wake up, I look forward to having breakfast with you. And I know that the thought of your uncle dragging you back to Denver to marry some bastard who might hurt you makes me want to put my fist through a wall." He took a step closer to her. "I'm not asking you to love me, Deanna. I'm offering you protection, safety, my name. Stay here. Be my wife. Help me run this ranch. And if those men come looking, they'll find a married woman, not a runaway niece." Diana's heart hammered in her chest. "Quinn, that's not fair to you. You'd be tying yourself to someone you barely know, all to help me." "Maybe I'm not being entirely selfless," Quinn said quietly. "Maybe I'm tired of being alone. Maybe I like having you here. Maybe I've been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay permanently, and this just gave me an excuse." "You can't mean that," Deanna whispered. "Can't I?" Quinn reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm against hers, calloused and strong. "I'm not a man who acts on impulse. I think things through. And I've been thinking about this for days now, even before I heard about those men in town. I want you to stay, Deanna. Not as my hired help, as my wife. Will you consider it?" Deanna looked at their joined hands, then up into Quinn's face. His eyes were serious, intent, searching hers for an answer, and she realized with sudden clarity that she wanted to say yes. Not just because she needed protection, though that was part of it, but because over the past 3 weeks, she'd grown to care for this quiet, serious man who'd offered her shelter without hesitation. She liked his company. She respected his work ethic. She felt safe with him in a way she'd never felt safe with anyone. Was that love? She didn't know, but maybe Quinn was right. Maybe love wasn't something that struck like lightning. Maybe it was something that grew, slowly and steady, nurtured by respect and companionship and daily kindnesses. "Yes," Deanna said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Relief and something else, something deeper, flashed across Quinn's face. He squeezed her hand gently. "We should do it soon, tomorrow if possible, just in case those men decide to start visiting ranches." "Tomorrow," Deanna agreed, feeling like she was in a dream. "I'll ride back to town first thing in the morning and talk to Reverend Matthews," Quinn said. "He's a good man. He'll marry us quietly without asking too many questions." That evening they finished unloading the supplies in a charged silence. Deanna made dinner, her hands shaking slightly as she sliced vegetables. Tomorrow she would be married. Tomorrow she would be Diana Irwin, wife of Quinn Irwin, rancher. It wasn't how she'd ever imagined her life would go. But then, nothing about the past month had gone as she'd imagined. They ate dinner mostly in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. After the meal, Quinn stood and said, "I should show you something." He led her outside to the barn. In the back corner was a small workshop area, and on the workbench sat a wooden box. Quinn picked it up and opened it, revealing a ring. It was simple, a gold band with a small blue stone set in it. "It was my mother's," Quinn said. "Not her wedding ring that's buried with her, but a ring my father gave her for their 10th anniversary. I'd like you to have it if you'll wear it." Diana took the ring carefully. It was lovely in its simplicity, the blue stone catching the lamplight. "It's beautiful." "My father said the stone matched my mother's eyes," Quinn said. "It doesn't match yours, but if you'd rather have something different, I can." "No," Deanna interrupted. "It's perfect. I'd be honored to wear it." Quinn nodded, looking relieved. "Good. That's good." They stood there in the barn, the moment stretching between them. Finally, Quinn cleared his throat. "I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." "Quinn," Deanna said as he turned to go. He looked back at her. "Thank you for everything." "You don't need to thank me," Quinn said. "Just be happy here, that's all I want." The next morning, they rode into Florissant together. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with shops and businesses. Quinn led the way to a white clapboard church on the edge of town. Reverend Matthews was an older man with kind eyes and gray hair. He listened as Quinn explained the situation in broad strokes, leaving out most of the details about Diana's past, but making it clear that they needed to marry quickly and quietly. The Reverend studied them both for a long moment. "You're both of age. Both entering this marriage of your own free will." "Yes," Quinn and Diana said together. "And you understand that marriage is a sacred commitment not to be entered into lightly." "We understand," Quinn said firmly. The Reverend nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll marry you. Do you have witnesses?" Quinn hadn't thought of that. He looked around the empty church helplessly. "I'll stand as witness," said a voice from the back of the church. They all turned to see a woman entering, middle-aged with a warm smile. "I'm Martha Matthews, the Reverend's wife. I was working in the garden and couldn't help overhearing. If you need witnesses, my husband and I can serve." "That would be very kind," Diana said gratefully. And so, in a small church in Florissant, Colorado, with only a reverend and his wife as witnesses, Diana Graves became Diana Irwin. The ceremony was brief and simple. They spoke their vows, Quinn's voice steady and sure, Diana's quieter but just as certain. Quinn slipped his mother's ring onto Diana's finger, and it fit as if it had been made for her. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn hesitated for just a moment, then leaned in and kissed Diana softly. It was chaste, appropriate for the setting, but Diana felt it down to her toes. His lips were warm and gentle, and when he pulled back, his eyes held a promise of more to come. They signed the marriage certificate. Martha and Reverend Matthews signed as witnesses, and it was done. Diana was married. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. Diana kept looking down at the ring on her finger, still not quite believing this was real. She was married. To a man she'd known for less than a month. A man who'd offered her shelter and protection without asking for anything in return except her company and her help with the ranch. What kind of man did that? A good one, Diana thought. A rare one. That evening, after a quiet dinner, they sat together in the front room. Diana was acutely aware that they were now married, that they were husband and wife, and that there was only one bed in Quinn's room while she'd been sleeping in his mother's old room. Quinn seemed to be thinking along the same lines. He cleared his throat. "I want you to know," he said, his voice careful, "that I don't expect anything from you tonight, or any night until you're ready. This marriage is legal and binding, but you don't have to share my bed unless you want to." Diana felt a rush of affection for this man who was now her husband. Even in this, he was thinking of her comfort before his own desires. "That's very considerate of you." "I mean it," Quinn said, meeting her eyes. "I know this happened fast. I know we're still learning about each other. There's no rush." "And what do you want?" Diana asked softly. Quinn's eyes darkened slightly. "What I want is for you to be comfortable and happy. Everything else can wait." But Diana could see the truth in his eyes. He wanted her. He wanted her to share his bed, to be his wife in truth as well as in name, and the realization sent a thrill through her. She stood and crossed to where he sat. Quinn looked up at her, his expression carefully neutral as if he was afraid to hope for anything. Diana held out her hand. "Show me our room." Something flared in Quinn's eyes, hope and desire and barely restrained need. "Diana, you don't have to. I know I don't have to," Diana said. "I want to. I'm your wife, Quinn. I want to be your wife in every way." Quinn took her hand and stood. He led her to his room, a space Diana had only glimpsed in passing. It was simply furnished like the rest of the house. A large bed, a bureau, a washstand. Clean and spare and practical. Quinn lit a lamp and warm light filled the room. He turned to Diana, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he was exercising over himself. "We'll go slow," he said. If you want to stop at any point, just tell me. I won't be angry, I won't push you." In answer, Deanna stepped close to him and reached up to touch his face. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, the stubble on his jaw slightly rough. "I trust you." Those 3 words seemed to undo something in Quinn. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. This kiss was nothing like the chaste one in the church. This kiss was deep and hungry, full of weeks of suppressed wanting. Deanna kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands sliding into his hair. Quinn's hands roamed her back, pulling her closer, and Deanna could feel the evidence of his desire against her hip. They undressed each other slowly, carefully, taking time to explore each newly revealed bit of skin. Quinn's body was muscled from hard work, tanned on his arms and face but paler elsewhere. Deanna traced the scars on his hands and forearms, marks of a life spent working with animals and tools. Quinn's hands on her were reverent, almost worshipful. He touched her like she was precious, like she might break if he wasn't careful. And when they finally came together, joining as husband and wife, it felt right in a way Deanna had never imagined it could feel. Quinn was careful with her, making sure she found pleasure before seeking his own. And after, when they lay tangled together in the lamplight, Deanna felt something shift in her heart. This wasn't just protection anymore, wasn't just convenience. This was real. She cared for this man, deeply and truly. Maybe that caring would grow into love if it wasn't already. Quinn pressed a kiss to her forehead. "All right," he murmured. "More than all right," Deanna said, snuggling closer to him. She felt him smile against her hair. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Deanna slept better than she had in years. The next few weeks passed in a haze of contentment. Deanna and Quinn fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and falling into each other's arms at night. They talked more now, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Deanna learned that Quinn wanted to expand the horse breeding operation, maybe start training cutting horses for ranch work. Quinn learned that Deanna had always dreamed of having a garden, flowers as well as vegetables, something beautiful to tend. He helped her start that garden, breaking ground for her near the house and riding into town to buy seeds. Watching him work, his shirt off in the warm summer sun, Deanna felt her heart swell with affection. How had she gotten so lucky? But the shadow of her past still loomed. Deanna knew the men her uncle had sent were still in the area. Quinn heard reports when he went into town for supplies. They were being systematic, visiting every ranch and homestead within a day's ride of Florissant. It was only a matter of time before they showed up at the Four Corners. Deanna tried not to let fear consume her. She was Deanna Irwin now, not Deanna Graves. She was married. Her uncle had no legal claim on her anymore, but she also knew that men like Malcolm didn't give up easily, especially when money was involved. The men came on a Tuesday morning in late July. Deanna was hanging laundry when she saw the riders approaching. 2 of them, both strangers. Her heart began to pound, but she forced herself to stay calm. She was a married woman now. They had no power over her. Quinn was in the barn. Deanna called to him, trying to keep her voice steady. "Quinn." "We have visitors." Quinn appeared from the barn immediately, reading the tension in her posture. He moved to stand beside her, his hand resting casually on her lower back. A possessive gesture, a claiming one. His wife. The riders stopped in front of the house. They were both rough-looking men, the kind hired for intimidation as much as investigation. One of them touched his hat brim in a mockery of politeness. "Afternoon," he said. "We're looking for Malcolm Graves's niece. Young woman, dark-haired, about 21 years old." "You folks seen anyone matching that description?" "Nope," Quinn said, his voice flat. "Just me and my wife here. Have been for weeks now." The man's eyes slid to Deanna. She forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, chin up, shoulders back. She was not the frightened girl who'd fled Denver anymore. "Your wife, you say?" The man's tone was skeptical. "You look mighty young to be married, madam." "I'm 21, Deanna said clearly. "Old enough to marry whom I please. And your name?" the man pressed. "Diana Irwin," she said. "Formerly Diana Garrett." She used her mother's maiden name without hesitation. It wasn't a lie, not technically. It had been her mother's name, and Diana had been named after her maternal grandmother. "Mind if we look around?" the other man said. "Actually, I do," Quinn said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "This is private property, and you've got no authority to search it. You asked your questions, you got your answers. Time for you to move along." The first man's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Graves is offering a substantial reward for information leading to his niece's recovery." "You sure you want to turn that down?" "I'm sure," Quinn said. "Now get off my land before I make you." The threat hung in the air. The two men looked at each other, clearly calculating their odds. Quinn might be alone, but he was young and strong, and this was his land. If they pushed, they'd be in the wrong, and everyone knew Colorado took property rights seriously. "If you hear anything," the first man said, pulling out a card and tossing it on the ground since neither Quinn nor Deanna reached for it. "There's that reward to think about." "We won't hear anything," Quinn said. "Good day, gentlemen." The men turned their horses and rode off. Deanna and Quinn stood watching until they disappeared over a rise. Then Deanna's knees gave out and Quinn caught her. "I've got you," he murmured, holding her tight. "You did so well. You were perfect." "Do you think they believed us?" Deanna asked, her face pressed against his chest. "I think they have no proof of anything," Quinn said. "You're Mrs. Irwin now. The marriage is legal and recorded. Even if they suspect something, they can't do anything about it." "But what if they tell my uncle? What if he comes himself?" Quinn pulled back to look at her face. "Then we'll deal with that too. You're my wife, Deanna. I protect what's mine. Your uncle has no legal claim on you anymore. You're a married woman. Your choices are your own." Deanna wanted to believe him. She did believe him, mostly, but she also knew her uncle. Malcolm was stubborn and prideful. He wouldn't like losing. Over the next few days, Deanna jumped at every sound, expecting to see her uncle riding up to the ranch. But no one came. A week passed, then two. Quinn made a trip into town and heard that the men had given up their search and left the area. It seemed Deanna was safe. Slowly, Deanna began to relax again. She threw herself into ranch work and into building a life with Quinn. She finished planting her garden and watched with delight as seedlings began to emerge. She learned more about training horses, discovering she had a gift for it. Quinn started letting her handle the younger horses, trusting her judgment, and their marriage deepened. What had started as a practical arrangement had grown into genuine partnership. Deanna found herself falling in love with her husband, with his quiet strength and his dry humor, and the way he touched her like she was the most precious thing in his world. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Deanna turned to Quinn. "Can I ask you something? Anything," Quinn said. "When you asked me to marry you, was it really just about protection? Or was there more to it?" Quinn was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I told myself it was about protection," he finally said. "That I was being practical, solving a problem. But the truth is, I've been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay permanently since about the third day you were here. You fit into my life like you'd always been meant to be here, and I realized I didn't want you to leave, not ever." He turned to look at her. "So yes, protection was part of it, but mostly I was being selfish. I wanted you here. I wanted you to be mine. And when those men showed up, it gave me an excuse to ask for what I'd wanted all along." "That's not selfish," Deanna said softly. "That's honest." "What about you?" Quinn asked. "Do you regret saying yes? I know I rushed you into it." Diana thought about the question seriously. Did she regret it? She'd married a man she barely knew to escape her uncle's control. By all rights, it should have been a disaster. But instead, it had been the best decision of her life. "No regrets," she said firmly. "You saved me, Quinn, not just from my uncle, but from a life I didn't want. You gave me a home and a purpose and a partnership, and somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Quinn's eyes widened. "You love me?" Diana laughed at his surprise. "Yes, you stubborn man, I love you. I think I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it. We got married so fast, for such practical reasons, I didn't know if you wanted to hear it." Quinn pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I've loved you since that first night," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Sitting in my kitchen, wrapped in my mother's blankets, looking at me like I'd hung the moon just for offering you basic human kindness. I was lost right then and there." Diana pulled back to look at his face. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't want to pressure you. You needed safety and shelter. You didn't need some besotted fool making demands on your heart." Quinn cupped her face in his hands. "I thought if I was patient, if I was good to you, maybe someday you'd come to care for me too. I never imagined you'd love me back this soon." "Well, I do," Diana said. "I love you completely, and I'm not just saying that because you're my husband. I'm saying it because it's true." Quinn kissed her then, deep and thorough, a kiss full of love and promise and commitment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not because you have to, not because you need protection. Stay because you want to. Stay because this is home. Stay because you love me and I love you." "Forever," Diana promised. "I'll stay forever." As summer turned to fall, Diana's life at the Four Corners Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. She and Quinn worked side by side, building their life together one day at a time. The garden flourished under Diana's care, providing vegetables for their table and flowers that brightened the house. The horse training business grew as word spread about the quality of Quinn's work and Diana's skill with the young horses. In September, a letter arrived for Diana, forwarded from an attorney in Denver. With shaking hands, she opened it, afraid of what it might contain. But it wasn't from her uncle. It was from her mother's family, the Garretts. They'd heard she'd married and wanted to confirm that she was well and happy. The letter made no mention of Malcolm or the forced engagement to Samuel Callahan. Diana wrote back immediately, pouring out her heart. She told them about Quinn, about the ranch, about how happy she was. She kept her descriptions vague enough that Malcolm wouldn't be able to use the information to locate her if he somehow intercepted the letter, but clear enough that her mother's family would understand she'd found a good life. A reply came a month later. The Garretts were pleased to hear she was well, and there was news. Malcolm Graves had left Denver, his business having failed. The Garretts didn't know where he'd gone and didn't care to find out. As for Samuel Callahan, he'd been arrested for the murder of a saloon girl in Cheyenne. It seemed the law had finally caught up with him. Diana read the letter to Quinn that evening, her hands shaking slightly. "It's over," she said, hardly daring to believe it. "Malcolm's gone. Callahan's in jail. I'm really free." Quinn pulled her into his arms. "You've been free since the day we married, but I'm glad you don't have to look over your shoulder anymore." "I never could have imagined it would end this well," Diana said. "When I rode up to this house in that storm, I was just looking for shelter for one night. I never imagined I'd find a home. A husband, a whole life. Best storm of my life," Quinn said, smiling down at her. "I got a wife out of it." Diana laughed and kissed him. "And I got everything I never knew I wanted." As winter approached, Deanna realized she had other news to share with Quinn. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. Now, watching him chop wood for the winter, she knew it was time. "Quinn," she called from the porch, "can you come here for a minute?" He set down the axe and walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the chill in the air. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Deanna said. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant." Quinn's eyes went wide. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor," Deanna said. "I've missed my monthly twice now, and I've been sick in the mornings. I think we're going to have a baby." Joy broke across Quinn's face like sunrise. He let out a whoop and swept Deanna up in his arms, spinning her around. "We're having a baby." "Quinn, put me down," Deanna laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "You'll make me dizzy." He set her down carefully, then immediately dropped to one knee, pressing his ear to her stomach. "Can you hear anything?" Deanna asked, amused. "Not yet," Quinn admitted. "But in a few months I will, our baby." "Deanna, we're going to be parents." The wonder in his voice made Deanna's heart swell. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy." Quinn stood and pulled her into a careful embrace. "I'm thrilled, I'm terrified, I'm every emotion at once. A baby, our baby." They went into the house, and Quinn immediately began making plans. They'd need to set up a nursery. He'd have to build a cradle. Deanna would need to see a doctor, make sure everything was progressing well. He talked so fast that Deanna finally had to put a hand over his mouth. "Slow down," she said, laughing. "We have months to prepare. Everything will get done." Quinn kissed her palm. "I just want everything to be perfect for you and the baby." "It already is," Deanna said. "I have you, that's all I need." Winter came to the Four Corners Ranch in a blanket of snow. Quinn made sure Deanna didn't overwork herself, taking on more of the heavy chores and insisting she rest when she got tired. Deanna found it both endearing and slightly frustrating. She wasn't an invalid, just pregnant. But she could see the care behind his concern, so she tried to be patient with him. In January, Quinn took Deanna into Florissant to see the doctor. Dr. Harrison was an older man who'd been practicing medicine in the area for 30 years. He examined Deanna thoroughly and pronounced her healthy and the baby developing well. "When do you expect the baby?" Quinn asked. "Late May or early June, I'd say," Dr. Harrison replied. "First babies often come late, so don't be surprised if you go into June." They left the doctor's office hand in hand, Quinn practically glowing with pride. They stopped at the general store for supplies, and when the shopkeeper congratulated them on the coming baby, Quinn puffed up like a rooster. Deanna had to hide her smile. As they rode home, Deanna found herself marveling at how her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been trapped in her uncle's house, facing a future she dreaded. Now she was married to a man she loved, living on a beautiful ranch, expecting a child. It seemed almost too good to be true. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted gradually, revealing brown grass that slowly turned green as the weather warmed. Deanna's belly grew round and prominent. She had to stop helping with the horse training in March, when bending down became too difficult. But she could still manage the cooking and light housework, and she spent her afternoons on the porch with her sewing, making clothes for the baby. Quinn was ridiculously attentive, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if the baby was moving. Deanna found it both sweet and exasperating. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I'm not the first and I won't be the last. But you're the first one having my baby," Quinn pointed out. "That makes you special." How could Deanna argue with that? In late May, as Dr. Harrison had predicted, Deanna went into labor. It started in the early morning with a tightening across her belly. At first, Deanna thought it was just the usual discomfort of late pregnancy. But as the tightening became more regular and more intense, she realized what was happening. "Quinn," she said, shaking his shoulder. They were both still in bed, though Quinn usually woke before dawn. "Quinn, wake up." He came awake instantly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. The baby's coming." Quinn shot out of bed like he'd been fired from a cannon. He grabbed his pants, pulling them on while hopping on one foot, nearly fell over, and had to brace himself against the bureau. Deanna would have laughed if another contraction hadn't gripped her at that moment. "I'm going for the doctor," Quinn said, pulling on his boots. "There's time," Deanna said. "First babies take hours. Make me some tea first." But Quinn was already halfway out the door. "I'll be back as fast as I can. Don't have the baby without me." Deanna did laugh at that, even through the discomfort. "I'll try my best." Quinn must have ridden like the devil was chasing him, because he was back with Dr. Harrison in less than an hour. By that time, Diana's contractions were closer together and more intense. The doctor examined her and confirmed that the baby would likely arrive by evening. "It's going to be a long day," he told Quinn. "First babies usually are. Make yourself useful. Keep the fire going, water hot. Stay calm." Quinn looked anything but calm. He paced the room, ran his hands through his hair until it stood on end, and generally looked like he might be sick. Finally, Dr. Harrison shooed him out of the room. "Go check on the animals or something," the doctor said. "You're making the mother nervous." "I am not," Deanna protested, but she was grateful when Quinn left. As much as she loved him, his nervous energy was not helping. The labor was long and difficult, just as Dr. Harrison had predicted. Deanna lost track of time as the contractions intensified. There was pain, yes, but also a strange sense of purpose. Her body knew what to do, and she just had to get through it. Quinn kept checking on her, bringing water, holding her hand when she'd let him, murmuring encouragement. And finally, as the sun was setting with one last tremendous effort, Deanna brought their child into the world. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy. Dr. Harrison cleaned the infant quickly and wrapped it in a blanket. "You have a son," he announced, placing the baby in Deanna's arms. Deanna looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and absolutely perfect. "A son," she whispered. Quinn was at her side immediately, staring at the baby with wonder. "He's so small." "He's perfect," Deanna said. She looked up at her husband, seeing tears in his eyes. "We have a son, Quinn." "What should we name him?" Quinn asked, carefully touching the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately wrapped his fingers around Quinn's, and Quinn made a choked sound. Deanna had been thinking about names for months. "What about James?" "That was my father's name, James Irwin." "James," Quinn repeated, testing the name. "I like it, James Irwin, our son." Dr. Harrison finished his work and prepared to leave. "Mrs. Irwin needs rest now, and the baby will need to eat soon. You know how to manage that, I trust," Deanna nodded. The doctor had explained everything during her earlier visits. He gathered his things and headed out, telling Quinn to send for him if there were any problems. After he left, Quinn sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Deanna, the other carefully supporting his son. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Deanna asked, exhausted but happy. "For this, for him, for being my wife, for loving me." Quinn kissed her forehead gently. "A year ago I was alone. Now I have a family. I have everything." "So do I," Deanna said. She leaned against his shoulder, watching their son sleep. "So do I." The first weeks with a new baby were exhausting. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he woke frequently to eat and needed constant attention. Deanna and Quinn took turns walking him when he was fussy, and they both survived on much less sleep than usual. But it was also a time of deep joy. Watching Quinn with their son made Deanna fall in love with her husband all over again. He was so gentle with James, so patient. He changed diapers without complaint, sang lullabies in his rough voice, and spent hours just holding the baby, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. As summer progressed, they settled into a routine. Deanna managed the house and the baby, while Quinn handled the ranch work. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, passing James back and forth, talking about their day, making plans for the future. "I want him to know he's loved," Quinn said one evening, watching James sleep in his arms. "I want him to grow up knowing that family matters, that home matters." "He will," Deanna assured him. "We'll make sure of it." As James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby baby, Diana and Quinn's love for each other deepened. They'd been through so much together in such a short time. They'd married as near strangers out of necessity, but they'd built something real and lasting. Their marriage wasn't just legal convenience anymore. It was a true partnership, based on love and respect and shared dreams. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James asleep in his cradle beside them, Deanna took Quinn's hand. "You ever think about how we met?" she asked. "All the time," Quinn said. "I think about you riding up in that storm, soaked to the bone, looking like a half-drowned cat. I think about how scared you were and how brave. And I think about how lucky I was that the storm brought you to my door instead of somewhere else." "I was looking for shelter for one night," Deanna said. "I never imagined I'd find a home. And I never imagined I'd find you," Quinn said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Best storm of my life." Deanna laughed. "You've said that before. It bears repeating." Quinn pulled her close, and Deanna rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Deanna Irwin. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Deanna said. "Forever." The years passed peacefully at the Four Corners Ranch. James grew from a baby into a toddler, then a young boy. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes, and he was equally comfortable in the barn with the horses as he was in the kitchen helping Deanna bake. Quinn taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, and Deanna taught him his letters and numbers. When James was 3, Deanna discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Quinn was calmer about it, though no less excited. Their daughter was born in the spring, a healthy baby girl with red hair that came from neither parent but from Quinn's grandmother, he said. They named her Rose. Life was full and busy with 2 young children and a ranch to run. But Deanna had never been happier. She had the family she'd always wanted, the home she'd always dreamed of. And most importantly, she had Quinn, her partner in everything, the man who'd offered her shelter and ended up giving her the world. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Deanna with a gift. It was a painting he'd commissioned in secret, hiring an artist from Denver to visit the ranch while Deanna was in town with the children. The painting showed the Four Corners Ranch on a stormy night, lightning cracking across the sky, a lone rider approaching the house. But the house's windows glowed with warm, welcoming light. "It's perfect," Deanna said, tears in her eyes. "It's exactly how it was." "The night my life changed," Quinn said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "The night I got everything I never knew I needed." Deanna turned in his arms to kiss him. "We should tell James and Rose this story someday, how a woman came seeking only shelter and the cowboy offered her forever." "Stay forever and be my wife," Quinn quoted softly. "Best words I ever spoke." "Best words I ever heard," Deanna replied. As the years continued to roll by, the Four Corners Ranch prospered. Quinn's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout Colorado and into neighboring territories. Diana's garden became legendary in the area, and she started selling her excess produce and flowers in town. They hired on help as the ranch grew, but it remained fundamentally a family operation. James grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose inherited her mother's way with plants and her father's skill with horses, becoming quite the horsewoman by the age of 10. And Diana and Quinn's love only deepened with time. They'd started their marriage as a practical arrangement between near strangers, but they'd built something that would last a lifetime. Every morning, Quinn still looked at Diana like she was a miracle. Every evening, Diana still thanked whatever fate had brought her to Quinn's door that stormy night. When James was 12 and Rose was 9, Diana and Quinn welcomed a third child, a boy they named Thomas. By then, James was old enough to help significantly with the ranch work, and Rose was a capable rider who could handle many of the lighter chores. The arrival of another baby was a joy rather than a burden. Quinn was in his mid-30s now, still strong and capable but with a few more lines around his eyes. Diana had just turned 32, her dark hair showing no gray but her hands showing the marks of years of hard work. They both wore their age well, seasoned by sun and experience but still healthy and vital. One evening, after all the children were in bed, Diana and Quinn sat on the porch as they so often did. This porch had been the site of so many important moments in their life together. They'd courted here, in the brief days between Diana's arrival and their marriage. They'd brought each of their babies out here to watch the sunset. They'd planned the future of the ranch here, dreamed their dreams here. You remember that first night? Quinn asked, his arm around Diana's shoulders. Which first night? Diana teased. We've had a lot of important nights. The very first one, when you rode up in the storm. I remember every detail, Diana said. I remember thinking I was going to die out there in the rain. And then I saw the light from your windows, and it was like a miracle. Like God himself was pointing the way home. I remember opening the door and seeing you standing there, Quinn said. Soaked and shivering and so beautiful it made my chest hurt. I remember thinking that I'd never seen anyone so brave. You'd been through hell, but you were still standing. I wasn't brave, Diana protested. I was terrified. You can be both, Quinn said. And you were both, you still are. Diana leaned into his warmth. Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I was. What if I'd ridden in a different direction? What if I'd missed this ranch in the storm? What if you hadn't heard me? But you didn't, and I did, Quinn said. That's what matters. You came here, I opened the door. And everything else followed from that. Best decision I ever made, Diana said. Running, coming here, saying yes when you asked me to stay. Best decision I ever made was asking, Quinn said. He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the fading light. I don't say it enough, but you saved me too, you know. I was just existing before you came. Working the ranch, going through the motions, but not really living. You taught me how to live again. You gave me a reason to. Diana felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Quinn could still move her with his words. We saved each other, she said. That's how the best love stories work. Is that what we are? Quinn asked with a slight smile. A love story, the best kind, Diana said. The kind that starts with a storm and a stranger's kindness and grows into forever. Quinn kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of years of shared love. When they broke apart, Diana could see the stars beginning to appear overhead. The same stars that had looked down on them that first night, when a desperate woman had found shelter and a lonely man had found his heart's desire. As Diana and Quinn moved into their late 30s, and then their 40s, their children grew and began making their own ways in the world. James, at 21, took on more and more responsibility for the ranch, proving himself as capable as his father. He married a local girl named Sarah, and they settled into a house Quinn built for them on the far edge of the Four Corners property. Rose, at 18, was being courted by a young man from town, a lawyer's son with good prospects. Deanna watched her daughter navigate courtship with amusement and pride. Rose knew her own mind and wouldn't be rushed into anything, just like her mother. Thomas, at 13, was showing signs of being the scholar of the family. He loved books and learning, and Diana and Quinn had already begun saving money to send him to college when he was old enough. The ranch continued to prosper. Quinn's horses were sought after throughout the state, and Diana's produce and flowers provided a steady supplementary income. They'd hired on 3 permanent hands to help with the work, good men who treated the 4 corners like their own home. On a warm day in May, Deanna and Quinn's 21st wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the main house for a celebration. James and Sarah came with their 2 young children. Rose brought her beau. Thomas helped Diana prepare the food. It was loud and chaotic and wonderful. As the sun began to set, everyone moved outside to the porch and yard. Someone had brought a fiddle, and music filled the air. Young people danced while the older generation looked on with approval. Deanna stood next to Quinn, watching their children and grandchildren, their extended ranch family, all gathered together in celebration. 21 years, Quinn said softly. Has it really been that long? And yet it feels like yesterday, Deanna said. Time is strange that way. Do you ever regret it? Quinn asked. It was a question he'd never asked before, not in all their years together. Any of it. Deanna turned to look at her husband. Quinn was 50 now, his dark hair threaded liberally with gray, his face lined by sun and age. But his eyes were the same whiskey-colored eyes that had looked at her with such concern that first night, and Deanna loved him more than she had thought it was possible to love another person. Not a single moment, Deanna said firmly. You asked me to stay forever and be your wife. It's been the greatest honor of my life. Quinn pulled her close, and Deanna could feel him trembling slightly. You've made me so happy. I want you to know that. Every single day for 21 years, you've made me happy. Good, Deanna said, wrapping her arms around him. Because you've done the same for me. They stood there holding each other as their family celebrated around them, the music and laughter providing a joyful backdrop. And Deanna thought about the journey that had brought them here. The terror of fleeing Denver, the desperation of riding through a storm, the shock of finding shelter, and so much more in a stranger's kindness. She thought about how Quinn had offered her everything without asking for anything in return. How he'd respected her, protected her, loved her before he'd even known if she could love him back. She thought about the family they'd built together, the home they'd created, the life they'd shared. And she thought about how none of it would have happened if she hadn't been brave enough to knock on a stranger's door that stormy night. If Quinn hadn't been kind enough to open it. If they hadn't both been willing to take a chance on something uncertain and unexpected. I love you, Deanna whispered against Quinn's chest. I love you too, Quinn said. Forever. Forever, Deanna agreed. As the years continued to pass, Deanna and Quinn settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long, happy marriage. They were partners in the truest sense, sharing the joys and the burdens equally. When Deanna's hip began to ache on cold mornings, Quinn took over the chores that required bending and lifting. When Quinn's vision started to fade slightly, Deanna read to him in the evenings, his head on her shoulder as they sat by the fire. They became grandparents 4 more times as James and Sarah expanded their family, and once more when Rose married her lawyer and they had a daughter. Thomas went off to college as planned, studying law himself, but he came home every summer to help with the ranch and to spend time with his parents. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a big celebration. Half the county seemed to show up. a testament to the respect and affection the Irwins had earned over the years. Deanna wore her mother's locket, which she'd somehow never lost despite everything, and Quinn wore his best suit. They looked at each other across the crowded yard and smiled, sharing a moment of perfect understanding. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, they sat together in the room that had once been Deanna's refuge on that first night. It was their bedroom now, had been for 30 years. The bed where they'd first made love, where they'd comforted each other through hard times, where they'd whispered secrets and dreams in the dark. 30 years, Quinn mused. We're old now. Speak for yourself, Deanna said, but she was smiling. She was 51 now, her dark hair almost entirely gray. But she still moved with grace, still worked hard every day, still met life with the same determination she'd shown when she fled her uncle's house all those years ago. You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Quinn said. Every bit as beautiful as that first night. Even soaking wet and half dead, Deanna teased. Especially then, Quinn said seriously. Because that was the moment my life changed. That was the moment everything became possible. Deanna reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. I never thanked you properly, you know. For what? For asking me to stay forever. For offering me your name and your protection and your home. For giving me everything I never knew I wanted. You don't need to thank me, Quinn said. You gave me just as much. You gave me a reason to live instead of just exist. You gave me a family, a purpose, joy. You gave me everything too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands, watching moonlight spill through the window. Finally, Deanna said, Promise me something, anything. Promise me that when our time comes, we'll go together. I don't want to live without you, and I don't want you to live without me. Quinn squeezed her hand. I can't promise that. We don't get to choose those things. But I can promise that whether we have another 30 years or 30 days, I'll love you with everything I am until my last breath. That's good enough, Deanna said. She laid her head on his shoulder. More than good enough. As it turned out, they had another 20 good years together. They saw all their children settled and happy, saw their grandchildren grow and begin having children of their own. The Four Corners Ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. Rose's husband became a judge and they moved to Denver, but they visited often. Thomas became a lawyer like he'd planned, but he practiced in Florissant, staying close to home. Diana and Quinn stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, though they still helped where they could. They spent their days in each other's company, talking and laughing and remembering. They took walks around the property they'd built together, watching new generations of horses being trained, new crops being planted. And every evening they sat on the porch, watching the sunset just as they had done for 50 years. It had become tradition, a sacred ritual marking the end of each day. On a warm evening in June, a few days before their 50th wedding anniversary, Deanna and Quinn sat on that porch as usual. Deanna was 71 now, Quinn was 76. Both moved more slowly than they once had, both bore the marks of long lives well lived. But they still held hands. They still smiled at each other with the same affection they'd shown as newlyweds. 50 years, Deanna said, marveling. Half a century. Best 50 years of my life, Quinn said. Mine too, Deanna agreed. She looked out over the ranch, taking in the familiar landscape. Do you remember the storm? It was a question she'd asked countless times over the years, and Quinn always answered the same way. Every detail. I was so scared that night, Deanna said. I thought I was going to die out there in the rain. And then I saw your light in the window and I knew I'd be safe. My light in the window, Quinn repeated softly. I like that. That's what you were for me too, you know, a light in the window, a beacon calling me home. Deanna squeezed his hand. We've had a good life, haven't we? The best, Quinn confirmed. No regrets. No regrets, Deanna echoed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The same sky that had been dark with storm clouds the night they met. The same sky that had watched over them through 50 years of marriage, of love, of building a life together. I love you, Deanna said, as she had said countless times over the years. I love you too, Quinn replied, as he always did. Forever. Forever, Deanna agreed. The children threw them a massive party for their 50th anniversary. The whole county came, it seemed, to celebrate the couple who'd become something of a legend in the area. The story of how they met had been told and retold over the years, growing slightly more romantic with each telling but always true at its core. A woman seeking shelter, a cowboy offering forever. It was a simple story, but it resonated because it was real. As Deanna looked around at the celebration, at the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who existed because she'd been brave enough to flee into a storm, and Quinn had been kind enough to open his door, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Her life could have gone so differently. She could have been trapped in that terrible marriage to Samuel Callahan. She could have died in the storm. She could have found shelter somewhere else, with someone else, and missed this entire life. But she hadn't. She'd found Quinn, and he'd found her, and together they'd built something beautiful. Quinn came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. What are you thinking about? About how lucky we are, Deanna said. About how many things had to go exactly right for us to end up here. Fate, Quinn said. It was always meant to be. Do you really believe that? Deanna asked. Quinn considered the question seriously. I believe that you were meant to come to my door that night. I believe I was meant to ask you to stay. Everything else we chose, but that first meeting. That was fate. Deanna leaned into him and they watched their family celebrate together. Then I'm grateful to fate, she said, and to you, always to you. As Deanna and Quinn moved into their 70s, they slowed down considerably, but they never stopped being partners. They still took their evening walks, though shorter now. They still sat on the porch watching sunsets. They still held hands like young lovers. Their children and grandchildren visited often, keeping the main house full of life and laughter. James ran the ranch with skill and dedication, consulting his father on the big decisions. Rose and her husband visited from Denver several times a year, their children in tow. Thomas, who'd never married, lived in town but came to the ranch almost every Sunday for dinner. One Sunday evening, after Thomas had left and the house was quiet, Diana found herself feeling nostalgic. She went to the old bureau in their bedroom and pulled out a small box she kept there. Inside were mementos of her life, her mother's locket, the marriage certificate from that hasty wedding in Florissant, letters from her mother's family, a pressed flower from her garden. Quinn found her there, sitting on the bed with the box in her lap. What are you doing? Remembering, Deanna said. Look at this. She held up the marriage certificate. 51 years old now, hard to believe. Quinn sat beside her, looking at the faded document. We were so young. You were 26, I was 21. We thought we were so grown up. We were grown up enough, Quinn said. We made it work. More than work, Deanna corrected. We made it beautiful. Quinn wrapped an arm around her. That was all you. You made everything beautiful. We did it together, Deanna said firmly. She put the certificate back in the box and closed it carefully. I want our grandchildren to have these someday. I want them to know the story. The real story, not the legend everyone tells. What's the real story? Quinn asked. Diana thought about it. The real story is that I was running scared, and you offered me safety without asking for anything in return. The real story is that we started as strangers and became best friends, and then lovers, and then partners for life. The real story is that love doesn't always happen at first sight. Sometimes it grows slowly, day by day, until one day you realize you can't imagine life without that person. "That's a good story," Quinn said softly. "It's our story," Deanna said, "and I wouldn't change a word of it." As the years continued their inexorable march, Diana and Quinn's health began to decline in earnest. Quinn developed a persistent cough that no amount of medicine seemed to help. Diana's hip finally gave out entirely, requiring her to use a cane to get around. But they faced these challenges as they'd faced everything else, together. On a cold day in November, just after Diana's 75th birthday and a few months before Quinn's 80th, they sat by the fire in the front room. James and Sarah were in the kitchen preparing dinner, their voices a comfortable murmur in the background. Most of the grandchildren were grown now, with lives of their own, but the house still felt full. "You think we've done well?" Deanna asked suddenly. Quinn looked at her in surprise. "What kind of question is that?" "I'm serious," Deanna said. "Do you think we've lived good lives, done right by our children, made a difference?" Quinn set down the book he'd been reading and gave her his full attention. "I think we've lived the best lives we could. Our children are happy and healthy and good people. Our grandchildren are the same. We built something lasting here, something that will go on after we're gone. What more could we ask for?" "I suppose you're right," Deanna said, but she still seemed troubled. "What's really bothering you?" Quinn asked gently. Deanna was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about the end," she finally admitted. "About what comes after, and I'm afraid." "Afraid of dying?" Quinn asked. "No," Deanna said. "Afraid of leaving you, or worse, afraid of you leaving me. I don't know how to exist without you anymore. You've been part of my life for so long, I don't remember what it was like before." Quinn reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "I'm afraid of that too, but I'm also grateful that we've had so much time. Some people never find what we found. Some people search their whole lives for a love like ours and never find it. We got more than 50 years. That's a gift." "I want more," Deanna said, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm greedy. I want another 50 years. "So do I," Quinn said. "But whatever time we have left, we'll face it like we've faced everything else, together. And when one of us goes, the other will grieve, yes, but they'll also remember. They'll remember every moment of happiness, every shared laugh, every sunset watched from that porch. And that will have to be enough." Deanna wiped her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," Quinn said with a slight smile. "You were just too busy being stubborn to notice." Deanna laughed despite her tears. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Quinn said. "Always have, always will." The winter was hard on both of them. Quinn's cough worsened, and Diana's mobility became more limited. But spring came as it always did, bringing warmth and renewal. They celebrated Diana's 76th birthday in April and looked forward to Quinn's 80th in September. But Quinn didn't make it to 80. On a warm day in July, sitting on the porch watching the sunset as they'd done for 54 years, Quinn took Deanna's hand and said, "I'm tired, my love." Deanna looked at him and saw the truth in his eyes. "I know." "Will you stay with me?" Quinn asked. "Until the end, always," Deanna promised. Quinn died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep, Deanna's hand in his. The whole family gathered for the funeral, and half the county came to pay their respects. Quinn Irwin had been respected, admired, and loved. He'd been a good man, a good husband, a good father. He'd lived a life of integrity and love. Diana stood at the graveside, supported by James on one side and Thomas on the other, and watched as they lowered her husband of 54 years into the ground. And she felt a piece of her own heart go with him. The months after Quinn's death were the hardest of Deanna's life. She moved through the days in a fog of grief, going through the motions but not really living. The house felt empty without him. The porch felt wrong without his presence beside her at sunset. Everything reminded her of him, and every reminder was a fresh wound. Her children worried about her. They tried to engage her to pull her back into life, but Deanna couldn't seem to find the energy to care. What was the point? The person she'd built her life around was gone. But slowly, very slowly, Deanna began to heal. Not because the grief faded, it never really did, but because she began to remember what Quinn had said, about how they'd been lucky to find each other, about how some people never found a love like theirs, about how she should remember the happiness, not just the loss. So Deanna began to remember. She remembered that first night, standing in the rain, seeing Quinn's light in the window. She remembered the way he'd scooped her up without hesitation, the care he'd taken of her. She remembered their hasty wedding, the way he'd kissed her so sweetly in that small church. She remembered the years of building a life together, of raising children, of facing challenges side by side, and she remembered the love. Oh, the love. 54 years of love, of daily choosing each other, of partnership and passion and deep, abiding affection. Not many people got that. Quinn had been right. It was a gift. Diana lived for 3 more years after Quinn's death. She was 79 when she passed, peacefully in her sleep just as Quinn had. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she'd shared with Quinn for so many years, a slight smile on her face. At her funeral, Reverend Thompson, who'd taken over from Reverend Matthews years ago, told the story of Deanna and Quinn's marriage. How they'd met in a storm, how Quinn had offered shelter and it had turned into forever. How they'd built a life and a family together, how their love had been an inspiration to everyone who knew them. Diana Graves came to the Four Corners Ranch seeking only shelter, Reverend Thompson said. And Quinn Irwin offered her everything, his name, his home, his heart. He asked her to stay forever and be his wife, and she said yes. And for 54 years they lived that forever, building something beautiful together. Now they're together again, and that forever continues. James stood to speak at his mother's funeral, his voice thick with emotion. My parents' love story was the foundation of my life, he said. Watching them together taught me what marriage should be: partnership, respect, daily choosing each other, even when it's hard. My father loved my mother completely, and she loved him the same way. They were 2 halves of a whole, and now they're together again. And while I'll miss my mother every day, I take comfort in knowing she's with the person she loved most in the world. They buried Deanna next to Quinn, under a large oak tree on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together. A simple headstone marked their graves: Quinn Irwin, beloved husband and father; Deanna Irwin, beloved wife and mother. And below that, a single word: forever. In the years that followed, the story of Deanna and Quinn became part of the Four Corners Ranch's legacy. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing about the couple who'd met in a storm and built a life together. The story was told at family gatherings, passed down through generations, a reminder of what real love looked like. The ranch itself continued to thrive under James's stewardship, and later under his sons. New generations raised horses and cattle on the land Quinn had worked so hard to build. New families made homes there, adding their own stories to the ranch's history. But the core story, the foundation of it all, was always Deanna and Quinn. And on quiet evenings, when the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset as Deanna and Quinn had done for so many years, someone would inevitably tell the story again. About the woman who came seeking only shelter, about the cowboy who offered her forever, about how a chance meeting in a storm had led to 54 years of love and a legacy that would last for generations. It was a simple story, really. But the best love stories often are. Boy meets girl. Boy helps girl. Boy and girl fall in love. Boy and girl build a life together. Boy and girl love each other until death and beyond. That was Deanna and Quinn's story. A story of kindness and courage, of two people who found each other when they needed it most and chose to build something beautiful together. A story that started with a storm and a desperate ride and a light in the window, and ended with a love that had lasted a lifetime and beyond. A story that proved that sometimes shelter is just the beginning. Sometimes offering help to a stranger is offering them the world. Sometimes saying yes to forever is the best decision you'll ever make. Diana had come seeking only shelter. Quinn had offered, stay forever and be my wife. And from that simple exchange, a lifetime of love had grown. A family had been built. A legacy had been created. And in the end, wasn't that what everyone hoped for? To find someone who would offer them forever. To be brave enough to say yes. To build something that would last beyond their own lives, touching future generations. Diana and Quinn had found that. And their story, told and retold over the years, served as a reminder that love, real love, was always worth the risk, always worth the leap of faith, always worth saying yes to forever. The end.